it? A keyboard. Whiteboard.
The first question is really hard.
A board of math. It's something that your teachers can help you learn.
A line of books.
It's kind of hard.
So like a line of books could be like on a shelf, on a board, and books are educational.
I think it might be teachers or students, like the students who got voted for class president.
It's the people that control the schools and everything and how they make decisions and what goes on in the schools.
It's a group of people that decide and make decisions for every grade in the school and like what to add, and like they added another side of Roper. So they had to like decide what money are we gonna put into this and how are we gonna do it.
Make everybody do the work.
What the teachers should teach the children.
Rules like not running in the hallways or talking when the teacher's talking.
Like what decisions they're going to be doing, what teachers are going to be doing it, how they're going to be doing it, where they're going to be doing it, and like what students are going to be in the class.
You need to think about how the students would behave and what you would do to make the school better.
Okay, if we just make sure everything goes correctly and nothing bad happens.
You have to be someone who understands what happens and what's going on. You have to be able to know how things work, and you have to know what you should and shouldn't do with this power.
Thank you.
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 Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this special meeting, which is really just a replacement meeting for last night's meeting of the Lincoln Public Schools Board of Education. We'll call this meeting to order. Laura, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Byer.
Here.
Mr. Boswell.
Present.
Mrs. Danick.
Here.
Mrs. Duncan. Here. Mr. Mayhew.
Present.
Ms. Mungard.
Here.
Mr. Schulte.
Here.
And the Open Meetings Act is posted between the two doors in the back of the room for those who would like to review it as according to state statute. We have minutes before you from the last meeting, minutes of a work session, and minutes from a special board meeting on the 11th. Are there any additions or corrections? If not, the minutes stand approved as printed. Mrs. Jablonski, could you please come forward to the podium? We have a special presentation. I don't do this very often, colleagues, but I've known this lady since 1964 when we were in fourth grade together. We went through elementary, junior high, and high school together, and she actually even stood up for me when I got married in 1972. Oh, wow. So we've been friends a very long time. So to give her this honor humbles me and makes me very proud to have her, not only as a friend, but as an LPS administrator. Ann Jablonski has been named a distinguished principal by the Nebraska Council of School Administrators and the Nebraska Association of Elementary School Principals. She's affected a lot of buildings. When I first ran for the board, she was at Norwood Park. She's been at Hawthorne. I know I'm going to miss them if I go through them. Pirtle, now she's at Coosier, where my granddaughter loves her dearly. She is revered by her co-workers and her teachers, who note her ability to inspire them while letting them learn professionally as they teach. Whereas Ann Jablonski has created a community of parents who are responsive to their school and willing to volunteer and participate in the education of students. And whereas Ann Jablonski is known as a fun, engaging principal worthy of the respect of students, whom she sees as individuals, each trying to do their best. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Lincoln Board of Education does hereby congratulate Ann Jablonski for being named a distinguished principal by the Nebraska Council of School Administrators and the Nebraska Association of Elementary School Principals, and her leadership for students and staff at Coosier Elementary and Lincoln Public Schools. It's signed by Kathy Danek, President of the Board, and Dr. Stephen Joel, Superintendent of Schools. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you. I'm very honored, and after Kathy introduced me, she really didn't, you could have given me an award, and I wanted to know that somebody else did, that you didn't, so thank you. I'm just really privileged to work in Lincoln Public Schools. I've been here a long time, and I have the honor to work with 37 and Cindy, great principals, and so I feel really blessed to receive this, and I get this because of all the things they've taught me. And I want to also thank you, as it's Board Appreciation Month. Those children couldn't have said it any better, and we know why we have a great premier school district. It's the work you do, and I appreciate it, and so do my colleagues. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ann. And I would ask, Nalani, go ahead. I would ask one of my colleagues to please make this resolution a formal motion.
I move that we adopt the resolution just read by our president.
Is there a second? Barbara?
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt the resolution honoring Ann Jablonski, the distinguished principal of the Nebraska Council of School Administrators and the Nebraska Association of Elementary School Principals. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Laura, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Boswell?
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew?
Yes.
Ms. Mungard?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Mrs. Danek?
Yes. Move on to the part of the agenda where we have public comment. I have no blue cards. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the board on an agenda item or other issues? If not, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion? Lanny?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Don?
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to approve the items on the consent agenda, which would be items 8.1, Human Resources, 8.2, Routine Business, 8.3, Option Enrollment Student Application for 15-16, and 8.4, Late Request for Enrollment Option Out, 2015-16. Laura, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Boswell?
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew?
Yes.
Ms. Mungard?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Ms. Byer?
Yes.
Mrs. Danek?
Yes. Moving on for first reading from board committees. We have, my favorite committee, the Calendar Committee.
Yes.
That would be Mrs. Mumgard. Annie, would you go ahead?
As Mr. Neal makes his way to the front here, I'd like it to be known that I actively asked to be on this committee. And one reason I asked to be on this committee is because as a user of the calendar and one for years to come, I really wanted to learn what was involved and why we did what we did. And I have to say that Mr. Neal and I we have spent hours discussing this and educating me and my fine team of other parents and educators and administrators on what we should do with our calendar. So on that note, I would like to hand it over to John and Mr. Neal.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Rita Bennett and I co-chair the committee, so we're going to co-chair the presentation as well. I'm going to start and do some of the historical pieces, and Rita will do the process we used this year and look at our new calendar. So we always start, like we start every meeting, with a real focus on our purpose. And the reason this is so important is several years ago, we didn't have a fixed purpose at which we were shooting our calendar. And so, with the help of the board, with the help of our community, we helped develop what would be the purpose towards which we try to develop every calendar. So I'm just going to read it because I think it's important that it's the basis for our work, that the school calendar demonstrates the district's commitment to learning. It is based on sound instructional consideration and priorities, ensuring the continuity, efficiency, and effectiveness of teaching and learning. And hopefully you will see that in the product that we'll show you tonight. The calendar committee itself comes from both part of the professional agreement, and it's also part of our policies. It's identified as a board committee. At the beginning, we'll start with both a historical perspective and a look at our calendar variables. And we thought in 2011 that we had lost all of our calendar records, and with the fire, we had a complete copy of every single calendar from the history of the school district, but Mary Ryman and other people in media from all across the district have slowly been putting this all together, so I couldn't help but share some things with you. In 1899, the district calendar was 24 weeks or 120 days for only 7 through 14-year-olds. And they had a 6-day Thanksgiving break that year, which is just interesting, the different kind of calendars. In 1920, it was still 120 days, but in 1924, they added to an 18-day winter break. And in 1937, they didn't start the first day of school till September 20th because of concerns regarding infant paralysis. And I share those with you just that each age, each generation confronts its own issues and needs its own calendar. So often when we compare calendars, it's important that we compare them to our needs and not to compare them to any one particular year or any one particular time. So now we're going to do a little bit of, yes?
I just want to point out that we were educating kids older than 14 back then.
Yes, that was the
Just
requirement.
wanted to
Thank you
say
very
that.
much. Yes, I should have made that more clear. This is just a quick look at some decades. This is the 1960s calendar, start of September 9th, fall break of 2 days, winter break of 8, spring break of 5, and ended on June 4th, so 173 days. Then when we go to 1970s, the start date moves to August 27th. 1 day fall break, 7-day winter break, 3-day spring break, ends May 29th, so before June, 177 days. We jump to the 80s, start of August 29th, fall break 2 days, winter break 7, spring break 1, and May 22nd, 177 days. You can see some similarities, but also some differences each of those generations. Interesting, in the 90s, we moved to a September 1 start date, fall break 2, winter break 7, spring break 3, and end June 2nd. We added a day as we moved into the 2000s, August 26th start, and now you're starting to see some of the patterns that are more familiar now. A 5-day fall break, 10-day winter break, 5-day spring break, and ending in June. In the 2010, this is 13-14, August 13th start date, 2 days in the fall, 10 in the winter, 5 for spring, ending May 22nd, and now we're up to 180 days in our calendar. But as you look at all those calendars, just kind of an interesting stat as you start looking at them. This is 63, 64, so we're now 50 years ago. It's a 270-day calendar. If you look at the very, very first day, adding in all the breaks and all the weekends and everything until school dismissed, and within those 274 days, there were 173 student days. So there was approximately, of all those days, 63.1% of the days were student days. 2013-14, 287-day calendar span, 180 student days, but almost the exact same percentage of student days over that 50-year change. So while it looks very different in some ways, in other ways, it's a very, very similar calendar, even though it's 50 years later. So now to a more present time. When we were looking at calendars, this is back in 2009 and 2010, we were looking at approximately 19 different variables that the calendar committee was to consider to develop the best possible calendar for the community. And one of the issues was those variables were many times in conflict. This is just pulling 3 from that list of 19. LPS breaks should be grouped together into fewer breaks to give students a number of days off between quarters and holiday times. Variable number 5, LPS should have many small breaks spread throughout the year. And number 8, provide a non-student day every 5 or 6 weeks in the school year. It made it very difficult for the calendar committee to come forward with something that really matched the intent of the district because the intent was so widely spread. So with the help of our educational service unit, we endeavored to do some research. And when I say we, it's really under the leadership of Leslie Eastman and Dave Myers, who led this committee at the time, to look at some critical questions that were facing us on the calendar committee. And here's what they found in this first research in 2009. What parents felt is their highest priority is that the school year should start before the second week in August and end in May, rather than starting later in August, closer to September, and ending the school year in June. That first semester should start before the second week of August and end before winter break, allowing the semester break to coincide with winter break. Semester and quarter breaks should be the same for elementary and secondary, and that's a theme that we've seen with parents' concerns, that there be a common calendar. First and second semester should have very nearly or the same number of days. LPS and UNL spring breaks do not need to be scheduled at the same time, and LPS breaks should be grouped together into a number of days off between quarters and holiday times. A great first step in looking at what are the priorities for the district and for our parents. But the question always comes up is, even in those, sometimes even those are in conflict. So the next round of research was asking parents to take a look at what were your priorities if you had to pick, if you had to say this was more important than that. And here were the priorities that came out. Most identified number one calendar variable was first semester school should end before winter break. Second most identified number one priority. Third overall, elementary and secondary calendars should be the same. Third most identified number one priority, and first overall is school should end just either before or just after Memorial Day. Number four, most identified number one priority, student breaks should not be scheduled immediately before major assessments. So from that, we developed and the board approved, instead of 19 variables, 3 primary and then 4 additional variables that really help the calendar committee hone in on what would be the most instructionally sound calendar. These are the variables that we use to recommend the calendar that you'll see today. The calendar process, really, there's for those that haven't done it before, as Kathy described, it can be a very unusual process, but it's starting to become a little bit more of a science, and Doug created a video that really describes the thought process that goes into it, so we'd like to share that with you.
Our task today is to create a school calendar for Lincoln Public Schools. We begin with 180 days. That number is determined in part by teacher contracts, state guidelines, and best educational practices. Our top priority for our school calendar is to ensure the continuity, efficiency, and effectiveness of teaching and learning in our school district. Sounds simple, but the school calendar revolves around many variables and factors that make the task something more like putting together a puzzle. So, we start with those 180 days of school. We have found that having winter break at the same time that we have semester break is the wisest academic decision for our students. And each semester needs to have the same general number of days. This factor determines why school starts earlier in August and ends earlier in May than in decades past. Our next decision is to identify spring and fall quarters, also having roughly the same number of days. But there's more. Student vacation days should not interrupt instruction just prior to any major assessments. In-school assessments typically come at the end of each quarter, which means quarter breaks occur directly after. And since there are generally more assessment days in the spring, second semester needs to be slightly longer. We attempt to avoid having short weeks of school. Again, it's not sound academically. And whenever possible, non-student days should occur on common holidays such as the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr., Thanksgiving Day, Labor Day, and more. Finally, at the end of all of these critical decisions, we have a school calendar.
So we start with research, move to variables. We have a general template that we use, but also each year, when it comes down to crunch time and we have to make some final decisions, every year we always come back to at least our Community Curriculum Council, which has a representative parent from every single school in the city or in the district, as well as our LEA faculty representatives and teachers to provide input. And it results in a calendar that you can see has changed dramatically from before the variables to after. This is 2007-8 compared to 16-17, the last calendar that we approved. And I'll highlight just 2 things on this one. And that is, back in 2007-8, we had 14 non-student days and only 4 student days prior to semester-ending finals for high school students. 2016-17, following the variables, there weren't any breaks right before finals testing that happened before winter break. In 7-8, there were 10 non-student days, our spring break, prior to spring NISA testing window opening. By 16-17, we didn't have any of those breaks. So we had instruction leading right into our major tests. You'll also see more balanced quarters and more balanced semesters. We are often asked as how our calendar compares with other districts. So on the left is the 2014-15 calendar for LPS and the other school districts that have that had calendars posted. And this includes Lincoln, Grand Island, Fremont, which is our conference schools, Millard, the school district smaller than us, Omaha, the school district larger, and the other school districts that surround us in Lancaster County. The student day is 180 to 177. The start dates are the same on average. End date is the same. The major breaks in our year, fall, winter, and spring, there's a difference of about a day and a half, and it really falls in our spring break. Fall breaks are both about 2 days. We have a slightly shorter winter break in Lincoln, and spring break is 5, and the average among those districts is about 3.5. So fairly consistent with other school districts our size, our conference, and in our geographic area. When you look at summer, especially with the shift of calendar, there were lots of questions about the impact on summer. In the years prior to the switch to have winter break also be semester break, they averaged 78.6 days of summer. Since then, the average has been 82.4 for an overall average over that decade of just about 80 days. So somewhat comparable in our summer breaks as well. The other question that we're often asked is, did it make a difference? And one of the things that we looked at, having winter break and semester break happen at the same time, so that learning had a natural break when there was an extended time away from school. These are high school courses passed at the end of first semester. The first column is 2010-11, second, which happened with the semester ending in January. The middle column is the first year, first semester ended in December, and then you can see the increase. As we switched, the number and also the percentage, which isn't included on this graph, but even the percentage of classes passed also increased. It wasn't just a result of the calendar. There's hundreds of efforts happening in school buildings all the time. But this could play part of the role in that improvement. This is graduation rate, the red line being the year in which we switched from semester break being in January and semester break being at winter break. Also seen a nice increase from before the change and after the change. Again, this did not cause that change. It's one of the hundreds of factors and efforts of faculty all across the district to help improve the graduation rate. So now we're going to jump into what we actually do this year. So thank you for listening to the history. Hopefully it helps inform the process that Rita will lead you through. Yep.
All right, thank you. I want to talk first of all about some of the things that our committee does not cover in its scope of its work. Truly, our committee looks only at the student calendar with respect to especially decisions that might impact student learning in a positive way. So some things that we don't cover the length of the school day, the length of the calendar in terms of number of days it is overall. We don't deal with what the NSAA practice and competition schedule might happen to be, or scheduling during the school day. We also, did I get that? Okay. We also do not deal with if there are any early release days during that first week of the school year, as well as dealing with questions of elementary plan days or professional development schedules. So truly the work that our committee does is to look only at the student calendar and what it looks like. One of the things that I like the best about this committee is it is really, in my opinion, a model of what an effective committee looks like that includes all the stakeholders. And I especially appreciated the fact that the committee includes obviously not just our school board representative Annie Mumgard, but also includes, and of course those other two people listed, John and myself, but parents are included in this as well, which is tremendously valuable to get their insight into various things that we discuss. We have teachers represented both at the elementary and at the secondary level. We have administrators representing, again, both elementary and secondary, and we also have representatives from the Human Resources Department who look at issues related to contract compliance. So it really has been a phenomenal committee with respect to being able to include all of the viewpoints of all the stakeholders and those who might have insights that if it were only one group or another, we might not have. So that's a great benefit, I think, to the district and to the work that we're going to present to you tonight. So to recap, the committee process simply involves the fact that we review the purpose, just like we started with tonight and that John shared with you, and those calendar variables that are critical. We work to apply those variables, then taking a calendar template and applying those variables to the template for 2017-18, develop an initial draft, and then we always go out, as John mentioned, and seek additional feedback from a variety of groups, and that again helps us to get even a broader perspective. Some of the feedback that we got this year was quite revealing, because what ended up happening is that we had both the Community Curriculum Council as well as District PTO meeting, and the one that's not showing on this particular chart is the feedback from the LEA faculty representatives that were polled. Interestingly enough, with all three of those different groups, the same result came out, which I thought was quite telling. And that result, you can see boxed in red there, is for option 3. The differences that we considered and surveyed were options 1 through 4. Option 1 was to start on a Tuesday, have a 2-day fall break. Option 2 was a Tuesday start with a 1-day fall break and a 3-day Thanksgiving break. Option 3, the difference then was a Monday start rather than Tuesday, with a 2-day fall break, 3-day Thanksgiving break. And option 4 with a Tuesday start, 2-day fall quarter break, and 3-day Thanksgiving, and add an instructional day then to second semester. So those were the options that we looked at. And as the red box indicates, option 3 was the one that was preferred by a majority of the respondents in those 3 different groups. As I said, Community Curriculum Council and the District PTO as well. And you can see the percentage responses on the left side. If we were to add the faculty representative end of it, it also ended up being option 3 with about 60% preferring that, to 34% preferring, I believe it was option 2. And so the bottom line is that, again, all 3 groups did show a decided preference for option 3. The thing to remember, I think, and that's significant, is that even if you have a clear majority, even if it were a 70-30 split, there's still a 30% that feels differently. But in looking at all of this, still, it was clear to us that if going by majority, that the option 3 is the one that was preferred. Given that, our committee got back together then and brought together the responses that we received from all the groups that were surveyed, and we reviewed that feedback. We also, again, with the idea of looking at the impact on student learning, we double-checked how our decision would fit with the purpose of our calendar work and with the outcomes we're looking for with respect to maximizing student learning, and then determined what our final recommendation would be to you. And here it is. Well, yes, you can. So, yes, the calendar highlights for 27-18. One of the things that I'll just interject quickly, that we discovered is that it's becoming fairly standard with respect to some of the things that fit where they fit. So this is what it would look like for 27-18 with our committee's recommendations for you to consider. The start date would be August 14th. Quarter 1 would be 44 days, quarter 2, 45 days. The semester would end December 22nd. Third quarter would begin January 8th. Quarter 3 would be 44 days in length. And again, quarter 4, because of inserting the extra days for allowing for testing, would be 47 days, with the last day coming on May 24th. So the District Calendar Committee does recommend this 27-18 calendar as the one that best demonstrates our commitment to student learning. We feel like it's based on some sound instructional considerations and priorities that were offered to us by all of the different stakeholders, and certainly allows us to continue on with the learning that happens in our district and with our strong programming that we offer to students. So if you have any questions, please let us know.
Questions, feedback?
Well, I was there. I just really want to add, there was a lot of discussion on a Monday or Tuesday start. There was a lot of discussion on the day before Thanksgiving and the benefits and of that not being something, and there was a lot of discussion on getting out the days we start and so forth. And I can just say that with all that discussion, that I think we swept a lot of cobwebs and tried to look at all the corners. And, as brand new to this and I'll put out there, not a huge fan, John had to keep enlightening me that we've always started in August much earlier than my brain has it that we have. I think I speak for a lot of parents of this feeling of starting very early, but I feel very strongly now that it really is based on very sound instructional reasons, and you really can't argue with what has happened over the last several years of our students finishing classes by Christmas time. I did notice that when Obama was here, he mentioned how his daughters were still studying for their finals, and I wanted to say, well, that's not sound instructional purposes. But I do think, you just really can't argue with that. And John will tell you, Mr. Knoll, I did try arguing with that many times, but I believe that we really have come up with a really sound way of looking at school. As well, it should be noted that last Friday, I believe, was our 100th day of this year of school. Am I right? Was it Friday? Am I right? Yeah, I saw the kindergarten necklace. Anybody else get that and gonna eat the Cheerios or anything? And we only have 80 left. So now my neighbor kids keep asking me what the countdown is. So I presented to you with a lot of thought, and I really, really want to thank all the other parents that were part of the board and the leadership that was given and everything.
And Annie might be the first board member that really volunteered for this. Usually they are put on it because they give a lot of
that I will
feedback.
do it again.
And I don't think we ever argued. We discussed a lot, but I don't think we ever argued.
There were some, very fine-tuned points about whether starting on a Monday or a Tuesday and who you were helping out by doing that. But we can do a conclusion.
Don and then Barb.
First, thank you to the committee for the work. I know from past experience that it's impossible to come up with a calendar that everybody loves 100%. A lot of variables to keep track of, and so I appreciate the work of the committee. Thank you for that. In the presentation, I remember seeing that video, I think last year, maybe the year before. I know it's at least 1 year old. I think it's a great illustration of the process. I also liked the addition of the history this year. It's neat to see that perspective and also over the years to see the things that change, but also the things that remain consistent from decade to decade. I also like it, and this is just one example, I think, of many, that we learn from our own history, and that our standards, our guidelines for the calendar have evolved over the years into something right now that seems very science-based, objective, and the foundation of a great process for a calendar. One of the things I wanted to point out is the effect that making operational changes can have on student achievement. For example, not having breaks right before finals or assessments, where you can keep everything else the same, but making an organizational change like that, and it has a dramatic effect on student achievement. And I love it that we look at things like that and continue to look at things like that, ways that we can do things just a little bit differently, and it'll benefit our kids. Same thing with the winter break matching up with the semester. I remember when we switched to that model several years ago, and there was some concern because if you make them line up at the semester, then of course that pushes the start of the school year earlier. And what a lot of people, I think, don't realize is that the length of summer break is still about the same. It's pretty consistent, but we are starting the year a little bit earlier than we have historically. But again, the eye on the prize is student achievement, and that seems to be very well served by that change. So I love this calendar, but equally as much, I love the process. So thank you for that work.
Barbara?
Thank you.
Well, we have the holidays aligned right now, so we don't have a lot to argue about, thank goodness. And I do appreciate the process and the time that's put into it, and that we've gotten a little bit more consistent. And the start date is reasonable enough. It's still pretty early in the summer. And yeah, I would have been one of them that would argue for Tuesday, mostly because people coming back from their summer vacations would have that opportunity to get back and get things ready. But other than that, this is a fine calendar. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Lanny?
Just one thing I wanted to note, and I agree with all of the comments of my colleagues, particularly with the first semester ending at winter break. It's really nice to see that end on a Friday. I did hear a couple comments this year about that short 2-day week, and it matters just where January 1st falls, having gone through that process. But I think people will be very happy to see that full week, and then they can go into 2 full weeks of a winter break, and they should enjoy that. And the only 2-day week that is in this calendar is the week of Thanksgiving, and that's another one I remember that we went through, and it's just a trade-off. You can either take that Wednesday where we have the highest absenteeism if we have school on that day, or we can have a 2-day week, and I think the 2-day week is the right choice for that particular case. But again, great work. This is a really solid calendar, really well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Annie?
I will say one of the first things Mr. Neal pointed out to me is if we didn't want to start in August, mid-August, the first thing I would have to do is change when Christmas happened. And I looked into it and found out that really was not possible. But and once you do the math, it's just really how it kind of shakes down.
And I didn't hear the normal warning that this is cyclical and everything lines up once every, 5 or 6 years, and then we get a calendar that makes everybody crazy?
We'll apply the same variables, but they keep moving when some of those dates are, so it'll look a little different next year.
I remember asking when I looked at it the other day, January 8th, really? And I think, wasn't there something that it was so early that we would have gotten out in May that it made sense to have the longer break at the winter break as opposed to letting kids out the first week or second week of May?
That's correct.
And it would have lined up with state track, which would have been another nightmare because we have so many talented men and women that are participating, not just for LPS, but across the state. And parents want to go watch their kids, and so good job. This will come back at the next meeting for us, for our consideration for approval.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And from the superintendent, we have first reading. It would be probably from the planning committee would be my guess. Northeast High School Fitness Center, Nutrition Services, Food Stores, Warehouse, and Southeast High, and North Star. So Lanny, since you're chairing planning, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll send it to Liz.
And on these items tonight, it's my understanding that staff will want item 9.2.3, the chiller, to be moved to action tonight. And so when we get to that, I'll ask for a motion for that. But other than that, for the other items, I'd turn it over to Liz.
Correct. You have 3 items before you that represent bids in excess of $500,000. So they come to you in this format for first reading and then second in action at the next meeting. As Mr. Boswell indicated, and Mr. Wieskamp can detail if you'd like any answers, the chiller, we would like to get that ordered and in before it's needed. So I think we could start with the Northeast High School Classroom Edition Fitness Center and see if there's any questions, and move through Nutrition Services in Southeast. So those 3 items on the superintendent's report we could focus on right now. That would be great.
Dr. Stanish, from my neighborhood, they'll be very happy to see this classroom edition. I always want people to understand that when we add on into fitness areas, it's not about just adding on for sports. This is one of the most used classrooms in the day in any building in the district. In fact, they're used sometimes for multiple purposes, not just for physical fitness classes. So anytime we can make a classroom work better It's great for students, and I'm grateful to have this on the agenda so the project can get started. Anybody else have questions on any of the other items?
Then
Lanny?
with that, I would move that we suspend the rules and move item 9.2.3 to action, and that we pass that item.
Is there a second? Don?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we set aside our rules and adopt item, or act on item 9.2.3, which is the chiller for Southeast High School, and it's a replacement. Lanny?
And with that, I would ask if Scott could provide a little information on the urgency of the request of why we should move that to action tonight as opposed to wait to the next meeting.
Really, the main thing is this chiller needs to be in place for the cooling season, and our rule of thumb is mid-April. April 15th is when we kind of convert from heating to cooling, and there's a long lead time on this piece of equipment, so the sooner we can get it ordered, the quicker we can get it installed and be ready.
And then how many bids did we receive on that item?
I believe there were 2 bids on the Southeast Chiller project, and they were very competitive, and we believe this number is within budget and within the range that we were anticipating.
Okay, and you're satisfied with the bid?
Yes, we've already met with the potential apparent low bidder and asked all the right questions going into the bid process, approval process.
All right, thank you, Scott.
Any other questions? Laura, would you call the roll on this item only, please?
Mrs. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew?
Yes.
Ms. Mungard?
Yes?
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Ms. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Boswell?
Yes.
Mrs. Danick?
Yes. And I have one, it's not really a question, but the Human Elementary Temporary School, just for parents who might not be paying a whole lot of attention, can you remind parents why they're going to have a temporary school and where it's going to be?
The bond program is supporting a renovation indoor air quality project at Human. It's a pretty exciting project. There's been lots of communication in the community, and meetings about transportation, I believe, are forthcoming. And so the students will be moved off-site next school year, and we'll be providing information and resources to support that. So the Human students will then be located at the site on about 7th and Hill Street.
So the families are already being communicated with, but just in case somebody has questions, who should they contact?
They could start with their building principal, and then they could also call District Office Business Affairs, but their building principal would be a great resource.
Okay, that's just for the Human parents. Okay. Human elementary parents, they're all humans. Okay, now we're moving on to item 9.2.4. North Star, is there any questions, concerns, discussion on that item? That is the closing of North Star since it sets aside our practice. I guess we'll turn it over to Dr. Stavum and Dr. Standish.
Yes, we wanted to bring this for you this evening. It's very timely. And the Planning Committee routinely monitors enrollment trends, and just now is getting ready to look at updating the 10-year plan. One place we've been monitoring very closely, both through student services under Dr. Stavum and on the facility side over the past couple years, is North Star. North Star is very unique in the fact that its geographic area in the city is becoming increasingly dense in housing and in student population. So its neighborhood is growing very rapidly from students that are attending North Star. When we look at that, we look at the longstanding history and tradition of Lincoln and the community of Lincoln. And one thing we want to be very clear about tonight is that we're looking at the high school choice and selection form process. If someone in Lincoln grew up wanting to be a Gator, and they're going through the high school selection and choice process, went to the information nights, and they're making the high school choice form filing, deadline of January 31st stated on the form, we will place that student at North Star. So what we're talking about doing is once that process is complete, here the end of January, we can settle in North Star's numbers, we can process the choices that are made through high school selection, but we will need to do something to limit the growth in the coming months for North Star so that we can plan for the facility for the fall. And so this is one thing we're looking at for North Star. moving forward to help contain and limit the growth there. We are seeing a very increasing student population, so we're balancing what we think the facility needs are and the staffing needs are of the school with the long-standing choice tradition in Lincoln, and we feel that this is maybe a way that we could manage both in the short term. This is something we'd like to talk to the planning committee about, so very formally, this is a resolution that starts to bring this to our attention, refer it to the planning committee. It will go in tandem with, as we're updating our 10-year plan, looking at growth in the city, looking at population trends in Lincoln, and we'll probably have some long-term conversations as well.
I would just add that in addition to looking at facility needs and processes like this, we're also looking programmatically at what other alterations are possible, both for reducing class sizes. We're pretty maxed out on some of those options, but we continue to look at things right at North Star, as well as some of the nearby options of what might be beneficial for our students if we were to look at some programmatic changes, maybe at nearby high schools that would be attractive to our students and also lend some relief. We know that there are some things right now that we can do in the short term that will help us maybe adjust things in smaller amounts and still make a difference, but we know then that the long-term solution that Dr. Standish referred to are some other solutions that we'll have to take a look at. But we're looking at all kinds of different ways that we can keep choice available as well as still providing students with the options that they want.
I would just add one last word of just comment for North Star staff. Through this process, I've had an opportunity to have lots of conversations and meetings there, and the staff at the administrative level, the teacher level, is doing an excellent job. I've been in the hallways of North Star, I've interacted with North Star, and they're really doing a wonderful job providing a quality experience and developing relationships with kids. So it would be remiss not to compliment and recognize that work.
Questions? Annie?
Could you give me just a refresher on what is the usual time frame that a parent has to choose the high school? You know, is it usually the end of January? So that's not an unusual number. That's not suddenly, oh, we should have signed them up. Okay.
No, that's the typical deadline, and that's when the majority of those choice forms come in, when the bulk of the processing is done. Then throughout the year, there may be one, or two here and there, but it's the typical timeline that we're following.
So this wouldn't become as a surprise to parents of like, you didn't give me more than 3 days to know to do this.
No, the form that they would be using to make the choice that they would have in their hands has stated January 31st, and that's been tradition.
Mm-hmm.
It, however, has been part of Lincoln's tradition that forms that are filed late are processed and students are given their first choice. We believe the impact of this is less than 100 students. A reasonable range could be 50 students because we are talking about closing a school to transfers moving forward because we're trying to limit the growth and limit the numbers. We're trying to reach a very delicate balance here of honoring a tradition, a choice, but then also having an eye on a school that has increasing student population.
And we routinely close grade levels in the K through 8 classrooms. That's how we monitor those permit requests that we've had, and that's always been part of our process. The high school piece is what's a little bit different because when you get to high school, it moves over to that choice process as opposed to the permit process by grade level in some of the K-8 schools.
Okay, thank you.
Matt and then Barb.
A student who's already attending North Star, who's already used the choice and is now a junior, do they have to then choice again to be a senior at North Star if they're not living in that district?
No.
Okay.
They would be able to continue.
Okay.
Barbara?
Is our, I'm not thinking the right words right now, but is our process for granting exceptions to our rules for closing for transfer going to be in play with this change?
Yes, I think that's part of the discussion that the board would have in the planning committee is leaving the ability for us to still take some considerations if there were some special circumstances, but otherwise the processes are in place as they are right now.
Okay, so there's a good chance that we'll end up still having the ability to appeal going and not being able to transfer in. Okay. Does this go and impact students' ability to transfer out?
No, it would not impact that.
So if a family decided to submit the forms after this date to transfer to another school, say like Northeast, they could do so?
They certainly could. Yep.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
You know, the hallmark of Lincoln Public Schools really has been that choice option, and that's something that we value, and most of the time that works out, and we're able to allow those things at multiple points during the year. When we're at this point in the year, why we have those deadlines is we're also doing things like looking at staffing and numbers of teachers that we need, so we have to balance that choice factor with also how we make those staffing decisions and budget considerations for the following school year. And so it's a lot of moving parts right now, but we know for North Star, we have a unique situation that we need to also be accountable for.
So I'm safe in assuming that this is a 1 year, this year, quick fix situation that we have before us. Is that correct?
I think it's going to be something you're going to have to look at on a year-to-year basis and then make that determination.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Lanny.
Just to say it one more time, because it is an unusual situation, and if I were a parent of an 8th grader looking to go to North Star, so if I were that, what I would want to know is that the deadline has not changed. It's still January 31st. But if I've heard the previous practices, that deadline's kind of soft and I don't need to worry about it too much, this is not a year to be soft on that deadline. This is a year that you want to make sure you get that form in on time on January 31st to make sure that you can still exercise that great choice that we have at the high school level. Is that?
Very well said.
All right, thank you.
I'll make sure. Annie?
Did something, are we surprised by this? Did something happen this fall? I mean, we've always had large numbers there. And is it just that we really just have hit the tipping point? Is that what has happened?
The school, as they built their master schedule last spring, we met with the school, we looked at their facility, we looked at room utilization, and it really was utilizing every instructional space every period of every day. You'll remember that official fall membership last fall at North Star was 2196, so approaching 2,200 students. So we believe that 2,200 students mark is using every instructional space in that classroom, in that school, every period of every day. So if you went to add another section or add another class, and as they approach their master schedule building for next fall, we're trying to limit the growth. So if we look to roll forward the numbers, we're needing to limit that growth. And we think this is a tool that the impact could be 50 students, like I said, less than 100, but it could help us stay within a place where we could use every space in the building, and definitely have to keep watching it, keep looking at it. We'll have a similar type meeting as they build their master schedule this year. We'll look at what additional resources we can provide North Star to help make it work so that they can run a master schedule to serve their student body. So this is really just limiting, thinking they're really stretched where they are right now, and we can't have any growth on top of that. And the neighborhood is continuing to grow. So that's when we're looking at the choice into North Star as a solution to help us limit that growth. It will be a long-term conversation. I mean, the planning committee will need to look at it and talk about it and bring some things back for the full board to consider.
But it's also a way that we also are being sure that those who are in that North Star is their school is getting the best possible that we can give them at this with these kind of numbers, so that we're not just ignoring the fact that these are big numbers and it's pushing the walls out, and yet we want to try to maintain the classroom sizes and the flow in the class. Am I correct?
Yeah, and course offerings for students.
Correct.
I mean, so it really, at the high school, it's all driven by the master schedule, and we'll be meeting with North Star again through that process to see what's needed at North Star to make it work for the students and of North Star. That's our highest priority. Yeah.
Don?
I recognize that what we're doing tonight is we're beginning a conversation. This is not intended to be a solution. I think that this district works very hard on transparency, and what this is